Hey friends, welcome to Bokeh, a podcast exploring the ever-blurring lines between the personal and business lives of professional photographers. This is your host, Nathan Holritz, and I'm happy that you can join me today in connecting with photographers and entrepreneurs as we discuss photography, business, and, oh yeah, that sometimes messy thing that we call life. This podcast is brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com. All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining me today for yet another episode touching on a topic that we've not spent a lot of time on, and that is to do with blogging as a photographer. We're going to get there in just a little bit, but I'm here with, I won't say a new friend, Abby, because you and I have had the opportunity to connect a number of times in person, I think at a couple of conferences, but I'm here with my friend Ebby Lowry. And Abby, that's spelled E-B-B-Y, but it's pronounced the same way as A-B-B-Y, correct?
Well, so actually it's pronounced Ebby, but I always say like Abby, but with an E because no one ever knows how to initially pronounce it.
So Ebby, and you are primarily wedding photographer, wedding and portrait photographer, is that right?
Yes, primarily weddings, and then every once in a while, especially for past clients and things, I do a little bit of other stuff on the side. Okay, and we're going to get into that a little bit about your business model, and then, of course, more specifically, blogging in just a bit. But as we normally do here on the podcast, we're going to start off with something that we call our technique for time, or a tool for time. And so much of what we do, certainly at Photographer's Edit and on the Bokeh Podcast, has to do with finding more efficient ways to run our photography business so that we actually have a life at the end of the day after we have run our photography business. I'm curious if there's something that you do to create time for yourself as a business owner. Is there a particular tip or trick or a tool that you use that enables you to do that? Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest thing as a business owner is realizing that like you can walk away because you're always you could be on the clock technically since it is your business. But for me, I think it's really important to kind of set hours, and I base it off of a normal work day primarily. So, I get up, I do my thing, I work throughout the day, and then around dinner time or 5 o'clock or so, I put it away. And I understand that, it's going to be there tomorrow. And so just kind of setting those hours, and also knowing myself to where if I'm really feeling fried or, not feeling like I'm devoting enough time to my work, then I go on a walk or I take my dog to the dog park, or just kind of finding ways to utilize my time the most effectively and then be able to walk away and have time for myself at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's funny how something as simple as just creating a cutoff point can seem so complicated sometimes. It's not like we actually need a tool to make that happen. Sometimes it's just doing it. But I love the fact that you point out that you know that you create that cutoff time, you walk away from your business, and you know that it'll be there when you get back. And I was just having this conversation with another photographer, Miriam Salgado, who was on the podcast as well, about the reality, which is that as business owners, as entrepreneurs, it's easy to get really caught up in what's going on in our business and begin to become afraid, fearful of the fact that if we happen to turn things off and walk away from our business, that something's going to go wrong. There's going to be some major emergency. And most of the time, that's not actually the case, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember when I was first starting out and everything, I would sit there and I would edit until a wedding was complete. So I would, for 2 days or 3 days or however long it took me at that time, it was nonstop. I would eat my meals in front of the computer and everything. And I don't know at what point I realized that's really not an efficient or effective way to work, but I'm glad that I did realize that.
Yeah, at some point we do have to step away. I mean, for the sake of mental clarity, for sure. I mean, that's really big for me these days in particular, because I know I can get so caught up in everything going on with my business that ultimately there's a lot just kind of jumbled together in my mind, and it's keeping me from being the creative, kind of original, outside the box thinker that I need to be as an entrepreneur. And so it's important to do that for mental clarity. And also for our physical health too. I mean, sitting in front of a computer for hours and hours on end is detrimental on multiple levels.
thanks to my Apple Watch for telling me it's time to stand at the end of every hour, because without it, I probably would sit there during the day way longer than I should. So,
well, and then I'm hearing your dog in the background there. Your dog probably begs for your attention from time to time. You have to get up and take care of your dog as well, right?
Does. She's a little bit of a needy creature, but she's the best, so I tolerate it. But yeah, definitely.
So in addition to, let's just say, taking your dog for a walk, how do you like to spend your free time? When you've got that space, especially in the evening, how do you like to spend that time?
Yeah, so I don't know if this applies to anyone else, but I'm a huge Food Network, Bobby Flay, he's my guy. So yeah. My boyfriend John and I, we spend a lot of nights on our couch after we make dinner. We love wine, we watch TV, just kind of unwind, and both of us work full time and everything. So we really value our couch time and just relaxation. And
I'm curious, do you take some of those, I guess, the techniques that you learn on those shows and translate that to your cooking? Do you get to experiment with different things?
Well, it's funny because I would like to think I can kind of cook, but in reality, it's more or less just following recipes and whatnot. But we have fun doing every single meal that we make. I think at the end, we're like, so what, if we could add something or what could be changed, or we try and be food critiques for ourselves. So
I think it's so much fun to, as you say, grab a glass of wine and try a new recipe out. There's a little bit of an adventure there in that's going to be, I think it's a lot of fun, and it's certainly relaxing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know when we started really liking it, but recently it's been probably one of my favorite hobbies, is just watching it and being like, oh, we got to add that to, our next grocery list. We got to try making the perfect soft-boiled egg or whatever we see on the TV that day.
Oh, absolutely. There was something, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I was actually, I got this idea, this inspiration, if you will, from watching, there's a Netflix series called Chef's Table. Have you seen that?
Yeah. I've seen a couple of the episodes. I haven't watched it recently, but people love it.
Oh, it's incredible. And so far, the first season is still my favorite. And I mean, the production value in and of itself is some of the best that I've seen on any documentary anywhere. And of course, the stories innate to each of those episodes, they're telling the stories of the chefs, and then of course, showing what they do. It's so beautifully done. But from that, I was a little bit inspired. So one night I actually tried something. I took a peach and cut that peach in half, put some coconut oil in the pan, and then put the peach face down so that the meat was actually kind of being fried in that coconut oil, and then poured a little bit of bourbon into the pan along with it. And you have to be careful with this. I will add this caveat because I did this one time and the thing literally went up in flames, kind of exploded. But
that's good.
Yeah, but most of the time that hasn't happened. So just be careful if you do this. But then it infused that kind of bourbon flavor, almost created a caramelization from it into the peach itself. And then you take the peach out and put a little bit of goat cheese in the middle. So now you have this.
Okay, now you're talking.
Yeah, the slight bourbon flavor. It's caramelized. Of course, you have the sweet, but then you have kind of the savory from the goat cheese. Yeah. And it's this perfect little dessert. It's not heavy at all. You got to try it. It's absolutely just incredibly tasty.
You had me at goat cheese. I'm like, okay, I'm in.
Well, that was my foray at my maybe the extent of my creativity when it comes to cooking, but it's certainly enjoyable. Tell us something totally random that most people don't know about you.
So I was thinking about this earlier when I read your question, and I was thinking about my upbringing and everything. And I don't think a lot of people know that I actually grew up on a horse farm out in the middle of the country. My parents train saddlebred horses full time. So that's their occupation, they're business owners and everything. So it was a different upbringing than most. I spent a lot of time playing outside, running around the barn, playing with barn cats and whatever. And then I also traveled a lot growing up to different horse shows in the summer and everything. So I think that kind of helps me adapt into the wedding industry and being gone on the weekends and everything because I was gone majority of the summer growing up.
Okay. So I have this kind of idyllic picture in my head of what it's like to own a horse farm. And it comes from a probably very naive
television or something.
Well, actually, it was reading the Black Stallion series growing up. For whatever reason, I was obsessed with that series. I mean, just really immersed myself in it. But do you miss being in that world? Do you get to ride occasionally?
Here's another interesting fact. I'm kind of afraid of horses. So
really? Okay.
I grew up, I rode, and my parents joke because they convinced me to get on a horse like once every 2 years. So I don't really ride. I don't know, just not my thing, but I have great appreciation for it. But
well, they're stunning animals, but they're massive animals at that.
Yeah, I don't know when it happened, and I think it took my parents like until I was a teenager to finally realize like, oh, I don't think she actually loves this. But I also was thinking about growing up. I think all I wanted to be in a neighborhood and, go over to my neighbor's house and play and everything. And now looking back, I really think it was a pretty special way to grow up and the amount of family time I was able to have because, my parents worked on the farm that we lived on. So I spent a lot of time there and got to do things a little bit differently than if I would have lived in that neighborhood like I dreamed of then.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. That's really cool. So how long have you been in business as a photographer? We're kind of transitioning from the personal to the professional now, but tell us a little bit about how you got started, what your career has looked like.
Yeah, so I was in yearbook in high school and loved yearbook, but I started getting really frustrated because we were designing all these beautiful pages and everything, and no one knew how to take photos. So I decided my junior year, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And I really started with sports photography. So I just started attending game after game after game, and, maybe I would get 3 good pictures or something. But through that, I kind of fell in love with photography. And throughout college, I started, taking senior pictures, taking family photos, that sort of thing, and really got into the wedding industry. Probably this is my 7th year of weddings. So started doing it in college, and it was kind of just like something that I absolutely loved. And it was a dream of mine to make it a career. But at the time, I wasn't really sure. And so I kind of worked my butt off throughout college to where when I did graduate, I was able to just take it full time there.
Wow. Okay. So, but where did the inspiration come from to be a professional wedding photographer? Were you following particular photographers? Had you seen certain work that was inspiring to you? What was it?
So I had one of my good friends growing up, her sister was getting married, and they asked me, it was a pretty small wedding, and they're like, hey, you take photos. Can you do these wedding photos? And I'm sitting there like, what? Like, that is not the same thing, like, no, I'm not prepared, whatever. And so I asked around, and I actually started second shooting, or initially shadowing, and then turned into second shooting with Kara Kaminsky Photography. She's based in Peoria, Illinois. And she kind of from there, in a lot of ways, became my mentor and helped me and taught me, and just kind of, I worked alongside of her, and somewhere along that just totally fell in love with weddings.
And you talk about the way that your career got launched, and you're kind of matter of fact about it. A lot of photographers are so apprehensive about the idea of pulling the trigger and actually launching their business and calling themselves a professional and charging for their services. What was it about kind of your just matter of fact approach to just, I'm just going to go do this?
Well, I think for me, there was a comfort in knowing, okay, I don't have to make $1 million right now. I'm in college. This is just my side hustle at this point. And so I really had those kind of formative years in college that helped me kind of figure out where I'm at and, what I want to do and what kind of my approach to this would be and stuff. So I think just having a little bit of that lead in helped me, that I know, some people don't get that.
Huh. Okay. That's interesting, but still, kudos to you. I mean, even as much experience as a photographer, a potential photographer might bring to the picture, I know that as artist types, I guess, we tend to be a bit over analytical and kind of get stuck in our head sometimes and make up reasons why we shouldn't just go for it. I love that you just went for it. What is it that sets your photography business apart from other photographers? And we talk about this idea of brand position on the podcast quite a bit because I think it's extremely important, especially when it comes to marketing. How do you set yourself apart from the photographers in your market?
I think that's 100% the most important aspect of my brand, kind of, because I think what sets me apart is myself as a person, and that really is my brand, and that I care so much about my couples, and I want for me, I want them to also look at me as a friend. So, the week of the wedding, I want them to be texting me because, their in-laws are driving them crazy and they're trying to plan, and just kind of being that reassuring light, like throughout the entire wedding process, and just knowing or wanting them to know that I care a lot about them, and not just, that it's a wedding and I'm making money from it.
This is an interesting point of conversation. I don't think we've really dug into this a whole lot, but the idea of you setting your brand apart from other brands. I mean, this is not the first time that I've heard this from a photographer. And my natural inclination initially is to think, well, that's not actually a brand position. Only because, like, when I think about a really distinct brand position, I'm thinking about something like a wedding photographer who only shoots black and white, whose target client are motorcycle riders in Wyoming. Like that's getting really, really specific. So now you're going after a niche that likely nobody else is. You've got this target client who you get to know so well that you can serve them the best way possible. So when I think brand position, that's more the thing that I'm thinking about. But it's interesting that you're talking about the significance of you in comparison to others, because you do have a distinction yourself. Nobody's going to match you exactly. Photography in and of itself these days, especially with the way that technology has continued to progress and will continue to progress, the idea of, quote, good photography is, I mean, that's almost a commodity, right? The idea of you being what sets you apart from others makes more sense, because it's hard to replicate that. It's easy to replicate decent photography and stick a Lightroom preset on it at the end of the day.
I mean, I think I'm the first to say, there are a lot of people that take really wonderful pictures. I don't think that in some ways I'm like, well, yes, there are a lot of people that do what I do and can do what I do, but I think it has a lot more to do with my clients and, how I'm making them feel, and how they're feeling during pictures, and the feelings that are portrayed in the images that I'm taking. I think it's more just kind of that in a whole lump sum, rather than just me, myself, I'm awesome. Like it's a lot more than that, I guess. I would say.
Well, and just to play devil's advocate and to be fair to the other photographers out there are other photographers who have even talked about this on the podcast that are working at developing close relationships with their clients, working to take care of them on an almost intimate level. But they can't do that in the exact or identical way as you can, your personality. They can't duplicate your personality, and that is ultimately what is setting you apart. So I as I'm thinking through this, as we're talking through this, that makes a lot more sense. And it is truly the thing that distinguishes your business at a very, very deep level from those around you. And I think that's a really interesting conversation. Now, how do you communicate that to your potential clients? I mean, are you doing this through your website? Are you doing it more effectively through social media now? How do you go about communicating your brand position to potential clients?
We'll dive into it more, but I think a big part of it is my blog and the things that are coming out in my social media, the stories that I'm telling of the couples I've already photographed. Like I think my ideal client, they already see those stories and they picture themselves being a story. They want to be seen on there, and they want to work with me, and they love my relationship with my boyfriend, and they think my dog is cute, and they love the pictures. And so I think communicating before that even initial inquiry, those people, I want them to be drawn to my photography, not just because they're pretty pictures, but because they want their story to be told by me through, my camera. So I communicate that way. And then meeting in person is really big for me. So if possible, I mean, I have a lot of brides and, couples that don't live nearby, so it's not always possible, but setting up a Skype meeting to where there's something to be said about communicating when you can see the other person, and just like a natural, just kind of flow in things and getting them excited about their day rather than just diving into like the logistics.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've been in a long distance relationship for some time now, and a lot of that communication happens via phone or even like FaceTime audio. And so there's almost an art to learning to have good conversation and learning to read somebody just by hearing their voice. But it is a whole different dynamic when you actually get to see that person's face, read the expression, the emotion in their eyes, or in their mouth, see the way that they respond to what you're saying, and then engage them accordingly in response to them. It is just a whole different thing. And technology makes it really easy for us now to just send a quick email. I mean, it has for years.
Yes.
Send a quick email or send a quick text, do things that are convenient, but it's hard to replace that, at least face-to-face, even if it's virtual through FaceTime or something comparable. That face-to-face interaction really does make a bigger impact, I think, in some ways. It's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like the connection that you get from that, even, when I'm Skyping or FaceTiming with my potential clients or, anything, it's like at the end, I usually am like, well, I wish I could give you a hug, I feel like there is that connection that's made, even though we can't physically touch each other, but just seeing each other and being able to communicate like that is huge to me.
Yeah, it's so important. That's really, really great. A common question that I ask on the podcast is about the toughest business lesson, or just toughest lesson in general that you've learned as a photographer, maybe a photography business owner so far. What comes to mind?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I think it kind of wraps back to where I started my business and being in college when I was really trying to get going and learning that, in order, if I want this dream to happen, there are sacrifices that have to be made. So, unfortunately, weddings are usually on Saturdays. And so that was college football games or, different events that I sat out on because I put my business first, and no regrets there because, I am at the point that I am now, and that's wonderful. But I think being a business owner, you kind of have to make more sacrifices and deal with time management and stuff, even more than someone who, gets a job and then has a boss and someone else sets those things. So I think just figuring out the time and being able to realize you're going to have to miss certain things in order to make it work.
Yeah, it's almost a kind of a somber reminder. But then, of course, the flip side of that is we have so much potential freedom and flexibility as business owners. It just is a matter of prioritization. There is always going to be, and I've realized this on a bigger level in recent years, there's always a compromise to be made. Compromise kind of feels negative. Ultimately, what it is you're just making a choice over, one thing or another. And at the end of the day, having that kind of freedom and flexibility is actually really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. People now, I mean, at this point, I don't even consider it to be a sacrifice because, I love my weddings. I love my weekends that I get to spend there. But it's always interesting when someone at a wedding's like, oh, like your job's so awesome, but man, you have to work all these weekends. And usually, I mean, I think about, oh, but on a Wednesday, I get to go do this, or I get to work from home, and I do get to do things like take my dog for a walk during the day if I want to, and just the flexibility. And really, rather than saying sacrifice, I think it would just be changes and, adapting to running your own business. Yeah,
no, that's a great, more kind of proactive and positive way to look at it. I like that.
It's not nearly as depressing as my first answer sounded.
This is kind of random, but we don't get into a kind of a typical bio reading as an introduction to the podcast. I've tried to avoid kind of following the typical template for interviews. And so as a result, one of the things we don't talk about a lot is the actual market that our podcast guests are in. What market are you based in at this point?
So I'm actually in the Chicagoland area. I shoot a lot around here. I was originally from Central Illinois, so I shoot a decent amount in Central Illinois still. And then I have a handful everywhere else. So I guess Chicago, but not limited to.
And that's such a massive market. Do you find that, over the last 7 years or so, that landscape, the market has changed pretty significantly? What kind of changes have you seen come along as a result, again, of, so many new photographers, especially with the technology that we were talking about?
Yeah, for me, my business is kind of, I think college and starting it in college has been such a blessing because my market has changed because a lot of my friends and things are now starting to get married. And so a lot of my clientele has been referrals from places that I wouldn't even expect to. So I think, I don't know if that's even the right answer to your question, but it's just been interesting to see, how things like that in the past have come back full circle and helped me grow exponentially in wedding photography.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that idea of connections, and I'm going to refer back to my conversation with Miriam again, but we were talking about the importance, the significance of connections. This is also something that came up with Kenny Kim. I had my friend Kenny on the podcast once, maybe even twice now. But he's talked about the significance of connections as well. Something that he does very proactively is to make sure that pretty much anywhere he goes, he's having a conversation with somebody, he's making a new connection, because you never know when those connections kind of come back full circle and might be a really wonderful opportunity. Obviously for your personal life, I mean, that's valuable in and of itself, but you never know how that might come back around for your business as well.
100%. I just got a email from a girl who had been my waitress like 6 months ago. And somehow we, started talking, and she's engaged now. And she's like, I feel like we were destined to meet. I can't imagine not having you a part of my day, because I've been following your work since we met. And just one of those things that, you went to a restaurant, you weren't expecting to gain a potential client.
Yeah. But as long as you're willing to be, I guess, kind of make yourself available in a sense, open up for the sake of a potential connection, there's always opportunity for that. I was actually on a trip this past weekend with some of my family, two of my brothers, my dad. We were on this motorcycle trip. It's something that it seems to be becoming like kind of an annual tradition almost. And so we were in the North Carolina, Georgia mountains, really, really beautiful. But at one point we stopped on our ride, pulled over, and we're enjoying this view and having some conversation. And all of a sudden this car pulls up, and there was two couples that were in their 70s or 80s. And I know it's totally random, but they had just some of the most amazing energy that I have seen just from people in general as of late. It was absolutely beautiful. So two couples, one that had been married 56 years, and the missus was very excited to share that. And then the other couple was apparently a nephew and I think his partner as well. But they were just so happy to be together, to hang out together. They were so happy to have a conversation with us. I took a picture of the four of them with the scenery in the background, of course. But the way that they were willing to open up for, just a few minutes, I've never met them before. I'm never going to meet them again. There was such a wonderful opportunity for connection with somebody totally random that I would never have expected, and yet just really brightened my day. And I think, there's a tendency that we have as photographers and artist types to probably in many cases label ourselves introverts. And so we kind of limit ourselves in the potential opportunities that we have to connect with people. If we're just willing to put ourselves out there a little bit, have some conversation, you never know what might come from it.
Totally.
I think it's a beautiful thing. Let's kind of talk about, this is a fun question for me. What is a favorite piece of gear in your camera bag? Like what's the first thing that comes to mind?
My go-to is a 51.2. So that was like, at the time I bought it, that was a big deal for me. And that was a really big step in my career to be able to say, it's not an affordable lens, it's a big deal. So, that was right towards the end of college when I was like, this is my career. So that's my go-to. And then I also recently have loved, and this isn't necessarily in my camera bag, but it is my camera bag. I recently switched to a backpack, and it's not even an official camera bag. It's like a little Amazon leather backpack that I bought for a purse and then realized, this could actually be really nice on wedding days. So I've been sporting this little leather backpack and love it. It's just nice. So.
Well, we may have to get the information about the backpack from you so we can we can link to it in the show notes. But this is interesting. I mean, I've noticed in the last few years that there seems to be this kind of newfound obsession in the photo industry with bags. And all these different styles of bags. But at the end of the day, the thing that's most convenient to carry along with you is really, I think, the most valuable. As much gear as we may have to keep up with as photographers, the last thing that we need is to be kind of having to lug a bunch of stuff from location to location. And if you've found something that works really well, that's convenient, I think that's really great.
Yeah, and I have an Amazon Basics camera backpack that I also have with me, but the little backpack is just wonderful to have, the 2 or 3 lenses that I carry around throughout the day, and it's just lightweight and on my back, and I don't know, it's been working really, really well this year.
And why did you choose the 51.2? Maybe this is an obvious question, but why did you choose the 1.2 versus the 1.4 or the 1.8?
I had a friend and I had used the 1.8 for a while, and it just felt like, it was wonderful. But I don't know. It's one of those things that it's probably been influenced by other photographers saying you have to have the 1.2,
Yeah.
But once you get it, I'm telling you, you won't want to switch back either. So I guess probably just inspired by someone else and then decided I had to have it.
Well, and probably once you see those beautiful kind of milky blown out backgrounds, it's hard to go to anything else.
Exactly.
Well, we alluded to our conversation to be a bit ago with regards to blogging. And this is a really loaded topic. I think we've really only touched on it once before, and yet again today, we're really only going to have time to kind of scratch the surface. But it's a big topic. It's one that's kind of interesting to me because our industry has changed so much. Social media has changed the landscape of the photo industry so much. I'm still curious to kind of get your take on how blogging how it relates to social media, and do you continue to do both, or how do you kind of balance the use of both? We'll get to that here in just a bit, but okay. I'm kind of curious to begin with, what is it that you love about blogging? I mean, not necessarily even for business. What is it to you? What does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked myself this. I didn't do one this year, but the year before, I've been doing previously a year in review on the blog, and it's totally personal, and it's just, things that I did throughout the year. There's usually scratches of business throughout there, but for the most part, it's just, I don't know. I think my blog is like my baby right now. I've seen myself grow through it, and there are blogs from years ago, and then, personal blogs and business blogs, and just kind of seeing the growth and just like a total reflection and journal throughout my business and just personal life that just, I don't know, it somehow turned itself into that, and I couldn't be happier to have it.
Well, you talk about it being your baby, and it reminds me of a conversation that has come up a little bit on the podcast about the reality, which is that you have platforms like Facebook or Instagram that may or may not stay around. They may change. Ultimately, you don't have control over them. The thing about a blog is that there is certainly more control over what goes on it. And then, of course, you can oversee pushing it out there to your clients or potential clients, to your fans, through newsletters or otherwise. But it's ultimately your platform that you're managing, and that carries a lot of significance. But that's how it matters to you personally. Talk to us a little bit about the value that it brings to your business. And I mentioned Facebook and Instagram. Those already exist. They're such easy platforms to share images from your latest shoot on. It's where people are spending so much time. To then have to go to an additional place like a blog seems like extra work. What is the value of the blog to your business that maybe you can't find in social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a total appeal to my clients to say, hey, your wedding is going to be blogged 4 days after your wedding. It's going to be up there. Everyone's going to see it. I joke like, you're going to be blog famous to my brides. And they're kind of like, oh, haha, but then it ends up being something that they're like, oh my gosh, when am I going to be in the blog? And then it's also a personal connection because I spend a lot of time on the copy of the blog. So, what I'm talking about, sometimes it's the experience that we had working together. A lot of times it's how he asked, or a story about the two of them, or, my favorite part about the wedding was seeing grandma, do this, and just kind of telling those stories. And as a result, kind of reflecting more or less what I was saying earlier with me being, part of my brand positioning, and just making that personal connection, I think, is a big part of the blog.
And you can communicate that in a way that maybe you don't have the space to communicate it on social media.
And just really, I think that I try, and, a lot of times my best friends will text me and be like, hey, you have a typo here, or here's this, because what I'm writing is, it just pours out. It's not, she was wearing a purple dress and I loved their flowers. It's more of like the emotion that's captured through the pictures, and the emotion that I've made connection points with my clients.
You mentioned copy and the amount of effort and energy you put into the copy that you're writing for your blog. Do you have experience or training of some kind in writing copy? Because this isn't necessarily a strength for photographers, and especially when it comes to social media, it's so easy to just kind of write the same lines over and over and over again. How do you go about that process of writing good copy?
I'm trying to think when I made kind of a switch, because I think when I started blogging, it was, I need to describe what happened that day. And it started becoming extremely repetitive and just kind of generic. And I don't know if I read someone else's or something, and I saw like, wow, there's a story there. I felt that. And so I started kind of trying to make, and sometimes I do it on my way home from a wedding, or I'll ask my second shooters, like, what are some of our favorite things through that day? And I really I don't know that I've ever had experience, or I haven't technically taken like a course on writing or anything like that, but just kind of like telling it how it is and making someone feel something is my goal.
So telling a story and make sure there's emotion innate to it. Are there any tricks or tips that you can give for making sure that grammar is at least halfway decent? Because I've also seen that that's not necessarily probably most people's strength.
I think over time, I'm just like, I think my blog has helped me develop better writing skills, just because through experience, I'll read it. And I don't know, I don't necessarily have any tips or tricks, but just making sure actually on my blog, there's SEO or something plugin. And so there's a readability aspect that kind of scores how you did and everything. And every once in a while I'll write one and I can just instantly tell. And based on that little indicator, it's like, oh yeah, I maybe should go back and proofread this a little bit, because that wasn't my best work.
Are you using WordPress for your blog?
Yes.
Yeah. So that we do as well at Photographers Edit, and there's a plugin. Maybe this is the same one that you're using. It's called Yoast, Yoast. And it does have that readability score, and it breaks down in quite a bit of detail, actually.
It does.
Why or why not that blog post is, as you say, readable. So for those of you curious, we'll make sure to link to that, to information about Yoast in the show notes as well. Speaking of tools, something that is really, truly important to us here at the podcast, and of course at Photographers Edit as well, is the notion of efficiency. Blogging can take a lot of time and effort and energy, and maybe there's no really taking that away in the end, but are there particular tools that you use for the sake of blogging that at least helps make that process a little bit more efficient?
Definitely. So, I mean, anyone who blogs is definitely going to be like, yep. But Blogstomp is huge because it instantly formats my photos to the size and everything that they need to be for the blog. And then as far as culling and figuring out what goes on the blog, I use Photo Mechanic. And that really helps me. And I think we'll dive in a little bit more on the process of how I blog and what it takes from the session to getting it up on the blog, those kind of in-betweens. But those are the two main, I guess, programs. And then something I also do is I print off a blank calendar just from like Google that I've downloaded. And I actually go through and look at my schedule. And this is completely separate from my normal calendar. I write in, if I have a shoot on Sunday, I know that I need to blog their session on Tuesday, or I need to blog this wedding from that Saturday on Wednesday. And so it really helps me, stay accountable, and then also just kind of sets up my day to where I know, okay, I have a blog today.
Yeah, well, planning in advance, there is something about being proactive in that, kind of like we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. It's intentional. It's very simple at the end to just put that in the calendar, but then that way you're not kind of going through each week haphazardly and just reacting to whatever is in your inbox or whatever's coming across your phone.
Exactly.
You've actually got a plan that you're working toward, and I think that's so important. I mean, that's a good reminder for me, and it's something that I can always stand to do more consistently, is to plan ahead. But Blogstomp, you mentioned, one of the things that I noticed looking at your blog is that your images, I think even more so than I see in the average photographer's website or on their blog, you very obviously have managed the resolution at which those images are output for the sake of the blog. And I'm assuming you're doing that through Blogstomp. How do you decide that? Because a lot of photographers, they're uploading what seem to be extremely high resolution photos that whether or not they're concerned about this for their business could easily be taken off and printed, at least at a smaller size. Yeah. How did you make that decision?
Well, and that's where, I don't put a watermark or anything like that on them, which a lot of photographers do. But with the resolution and everything, I'm trying to look right now, actually. So my image width is at 800. And so that automatically resizes, and my JPEG quality is at 95 rather than 100. So I think those kind of play into that and just make sure that, yes, they're crisp and clear on the blog, but yeah, I mean, people aren't taking them and printing them off of it.
And then Photo Mechanic, why Photo Mechanic over just using Lightroom?
Well, because I only import into Lightroom the pictures that I'm going to edit. So in the past, I would cull using Lightroom, and then my Lightroom catalogs would have so many images in it. And I think just being able to sort through what you're going to do ahead of time, it simplifies your process so much. And I used to cull through Bridge as well, and just being able to quickly do it was Photo Mechanic's big strength.
For sure. Yeah. And that's certainly something that I've heard over and over again. I know that Adobe is claiming to speed up the Lightroom software. I'm not sure how much they actually have, even with their most recent updates. But yeah, I hear you on the efficiency of Photo Mechanic, and those catalogs, at least in the past anyway, with the older versions of Lightroom, have seemed to kind of get bogged down after you put too many images through the catalog.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like I maybe learned that the hard way before. I don't, in my head, I thought, I don't need Photo Mechanic. This is just an additional thing. And I would just have the slowest Lightroom catalogs you could imagine. Because I would just load them and they were going to die. So yeah, huge game changer there.
Well, let's actually talk about your process. You alluded to this a second ago, but I'd love, if you don't mind, if just kind of walking our listeners through the process, maybe starting with getting home from that shoot. What does your blogging process look like? What are the steps in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've mentioned, for me, blogging is the first thing that I really do with any of the images. So like I said, if I have a wedding on Saturday, that bride knows their wedding is blogged on Wednesday. So for me, I get home, I put them on the computer, I back them up, and then I cull fully through. So I cull everything that they're going to get in the end, if not more, because then I eventually kind of cut back. But I cull fully, and then from there, I cull for the blog specifically. So if it's an engagement or anything, I pick the images or a little bit more than what will actually end up on there. And then from there, I edit those. And it actually helps me, kind of side note, it helps me in the future for editing full weddings and things, because then I use a lot of like copying, pasting format for similar images and things in Lightroom. So I cull for the blog, I edit those. Once I've edited them, I Blogstomp them, I create the blog post. And then last but not least is really sitting down. Usually it's either a couple hours later or the next day, depending on when I want to get the blog up, but writing that copy and writing that story and making sure that I feel like someone is, feeling the things that I've said earlier, and that it kind of reflects how I feel about the couple and makes people see something through the pictures more so than just looking at them as, X and Y person. Yeah,
I mean, I know we already talked about it, but I'm still thinking about that tendency that photographers have to start their social media post or maybe their blog post with, "I'm so excited to have photographed," dot. It's the same kind of thing over and over again. It takes a little bit of effort to kind of take a step back and really think with a fresh mind about how you can effectively tell that story in a way that's unique to that client.
Well, and I mean, you referenced it, but taking time, and blogging does take a lot of time, but just making sure, every once in a while, if I am kind of in a rut and I look and I have started something like that, I can't tell you how many times I've just sat there and deleted the entire copy and thought, okay, Ebby, you really need to dive in deep here. You need to think about this couple, because what you're saying about them is not accurately portraying them as a couple.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, as much as we do talk about efficiency, at the end of the day, sometimes things just take a little bit of extra work and effort, and that's okay. But the final product hopefully is going to benefit from that. You mentioned culling and then culling for the blog. So for the sake of the listeners who they may be wondering of what this actually looks like, do you have a particular process, flagging or starring or otherwise, where you're culling for the general edit, but then culling again for the blog? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I'm sure someone else out there has a better way of doing it. But for me, I use Photo Mechanic. I have an originals folder. And then from there, I create within the same big folder of the couple or the wedding or whatever, I'll create a to edit for like, overall Cull. And then I'll have a to blog folder. And so I'm actually copying and pasting them over into those different folders rather than flagging or anything. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. And that's just kind of how I've started doing it.
And are you using like keyboard shortcuts or something like that to speed up the process? Or how do you go about that, copying the images into those folders?
Yeah, I mean, typically in Photo Mechanic, there's a little plus on the top. And so it highlights all of those throughout when you're clicking the plus button. So I'm clicking through with my left hand on the right button or whatever. And then I'm clicking with the other hand any image that I think is good enough to cull in general. And then when I go back again, I'm much more selective for what's going to go on the blog. But yeah, I mean, it really goes pretty fast as soon as you get comfortable with the keys and different things that do things. Yeah,
it's definitely advantageous to all of those listening in, whether you outsource editing to a different company or you have an in-house assistant that's doing it. At some point in time, you're going to likely have to work with some type of image editing software, and really any software for that matter. It's good to take advantage of keyboard shortcuts. It can save so much time. Even just using a few simple keyboard shortcuts. You mentioned editing the blog images specifically. Do you process your images for the blog differently than you do for the gallery at large? Like that gallery, the bigger gallery that you're going to deliver to your clients, do you process your blog images differently?
No. So, I mean, it's the same process. It's just, a full wedding gallery is going to be back to my bride within 6 to 8 weeks. The blog is within 4 days. And so that's really just my first step. And I kind of talked about it, and I don't know if it was clear, but when I edit those blog images, they're in my Lightroom catalog. So then when I go in and add the remaining images that I have to edit, usually there's at least one image from each kind of little section of time in the day that really helps me to where I can copy those settings that I had on those blog images and then paste them over. And then that really makes my editing minimal as far as continuing, because I've already kind of gotten the overview edit on the blog pictures.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And then as far as the delivery, you were talking about delivery 6 to 8 weeks for the delivery of the whole gallery. But what you shoot on Saturday, you're going to deliver that blog post by Wednesday. Is there a particular reason for that time frame? Have you tested different time frames and seen that certain ones work better than others?
Well, I started doing the Wednesday because for me, it's it's still on the guests' mind. They're still excited and thinking about how much fun they had at that wedding. That bride and groom may be on a honeymoon, and it's like they're going to find a way to get Wi-Fi so that they can see their pictures there. It's also that same day that I send the blog, I send them, a full, what will be their full gallery. I send them a pixie set gallery of those blog images. And I also send that to the vendors. So, having that quick turnaround is really, really something that vendors appreciate, because then use those high quality photos to show off their flowers or their cake or whatever they did for that wedding.
Yeah, and adding value to those vendors. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast multiple times now, but it just makes such a big difference when it comes to building your brand in that market. If they see that Ebby is going to, add value to their brand by just willingly providing these images, they're going to benefit their brand. It's tough not to willingly reciprocate the love, and that can make such a big difference in building your photography business. So I do have one last question though about social media. You've got these images, this beautiful copy up on your blog post. How does that translate to what you're doing on social media? Is there some kind of correlation between what you're doing on the blog and then what you're posting to Facebook or to Instagram?
Definitely. So, I mean, I try and be consistent as far as if I'm sharing something on the blog, I'm going to make sure and talk about it on my Facebook and, include a link to the blog, but also give people a little bit of a sneak preview on my Facebook or on whatever that makes them want to go to the blog. Same with Instagram, especially with Instagram stories, giving them enough to where it's still making them inclined to go look at the rest of them. So I try not to double post 100% or show off, everything that's going to be on the blog, because I want people to be like, well, I have to go read the rest of this story.
I got to tease them, create some mystery and excitement about it. That's really great. Well, speaking of your blog and social media, in closing, will you just kind of share with our listeners where they can follow you online, the website, the blog, social media as well?
Definitely. So my Facebook is just Ebby Photography. And again, I share lots of blog stuff on there. My Instagram is just, I'll spell it because no one ever knows how to spell it. It's EBBY, and then it's _ LOWRY. So Ebby Lowry is the Instagram. And then my website that has my blog and everything is just EbbyLphotography.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to link to all of these in the show notes in addition to the resources that we mentioned. Ebby, thank you so much for making time to share with the Bokeh Podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast today. Will you let us know what you think by leaving a review of the podcast in iTunes or maybe in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast, maybe suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My direct email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Photographers Edit, custom image editing for the wedding and portrait photographer. Just visit photographersedit.com.